the UN
GMOs.
programs. Yeah, things like that. All of those things just had to do with when I decided I was going to be making a film, I wanted there to be actual facts to back up a lot of the claims that I was making. So that's where all that research came in, and none of that's on the band side because that's really too factual. It's really just it stands there as a reference.
Yeah, great. I'm going to get into.
I have one more question. Sorry to cut you off. When you shot these two films, like, what was your thinking before you've done this, and how has that changed?
Well, I can start first with Esoteric Agenda. The mind frame before that was I really was looking at everything that was going on the planet as a symptom already at that time. I realized that everything that was happening all the way from the elite down to basically the haves and the have-nots, from the lower class all the way up to the upper class, what I was finding out was that all of these things that are going on are definitely symptoms, but I didn't quite understand what. It's very easy to look at other people's theses that say, okay, it's the mind, it's psychology, it's consciousness, it's things like that really drives every culture and every economy, every political structure. But I understood that intellectually, but I didn't truly understand it. I didn't comprehend it to the core of my being. So I really didn't want to add too much of that in the film. So what I did was I drew parallels to it. And the reason why I stayed on the think for yourself type of tone for all of Esoteric Agenda was because I wanted to draw all these parallels but allow for the audience, the viewer, to look at it and say, okay, well, I see the overall consensus of what's going on, but what does that mean? And that's why the whole end of that film had to do with what's actually going on is an inner battle. And I didn't want to tell people what I felt about it, even though I did have very strong opinions about it. I wanted people to come to their own conclusions. And then that was really the mind frame around Esoteric Agenda. But for Kymatica, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Kymatica, the mind frame that I was at beforehand of that one was I really felt that I needed to present something a lot more, I don't want to say basic because it doesn't seem too basic, but it's getting down to the fundamental principles of why whole societies and whole generations and whole cultures, just within the last 100 years, have moved so dramatically in one direction and one direction only. So I wanted to again draw parallels to that. So I threw in some information and some details, but I really brought it back down and I used a lot of dark, like a lot of black and a lot of darker colors in that film to really show that this is something that not a lot of light has been shed on. And actually, it psychologically, what that does is it really does. It lowers a lot of the stimulation when there's more of like the darker the contrast to it. It lowers a lot of the stimulation, and it's not just a bunch of flashy things in the eyes. It basically allows for you to get into and understand the actual intention behind the film, which I don't care if everybody thinks that all the information and the details are completely useless in there, as long as they do understand the attitude or the essence of the film. That's all that I really want for people to take out of the film. I don't care if they remember any of the facts or the details or anything like that. I just want them to understand the underlying tone of it.
The underlying message.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get that. And definitely I think you did a great job. I'm a big fan of Kymatica, a big fan of Esoteric Agenda. Kymatica just hit me up. I've been researching for, 25, almost 30 years. And so, I mean, it wasn't so much, it was new information because it wasn't to me. But Kymatica just hit me upside the head in his presentation. I was like, okay, wow. That's a way to just give this to your friends, watch this, change your reality. Seriously.
Right.
I can spend the next 5 years talking about this stuff to you, but just watch this. It'll clear it all up. You know, to me, that was what Kymatica was. Kymatica to me was a tool. I already had a lot of the same concepts in my head. So, but to put them out in a visual and audio format is not easy to do, and arrange it and structure it in such a way that it tells a story from beginning to end, and to educate people, that's what you have to do.
Right, and I think the number one, which is, I mean, this is how we can kind of get into the Hanged Man project. Is,
yeah, I'd love to get into that.
Yeah, the number one reason why I really am gearing the Hanged Man project more towards the artistic side, even though it's not solely that, because I don't want to neglect anything from the Hanged Man project, but it's taking a little bit more of that route, because as you know, with anything, specifically within consciousness, the electromagnetic qualities of it, it needs balance. We definitely need balance. And one thing that I believe is definitely going to balance a lot of the energy that we see today is more of that artistic draw, because I think that art has been one thing that has been slowly degraded, at least in the past 20 years. And there are some amazing artists out there, and I'm not just talking about music, I'm talking about any type of art. I think even the movies, you can find some beautiful art there. And as much as a lot of people say that Hollywood is nothing but a bunch of propaganda, it's really only the way you take it. And that's like saying money is evil. And I've said it in Kymatica, money is not evil. It's the intentions within people that money draws out. If we sublimate all that psychic content into what money is, if you really look at the underlying tone of what money is a conduit for energy. That's all it is. And we are the ones who fill that conduit with our energy. So it couldn't be the money, these pieces of cotton paper, that are evil. It's what we do with it, obviously. And so what I began to realize, and that came, that whole rant came from the Hollywood side of things, because I do actually believe that there are some films out there that really do show strong allegory and strong messages. And regardless if there is a little bit of propaganda here and there, the underlying, even because I really get into script reading. I like I do a lot of screenwriting myself, so I understand the artwork that actually has to go into what a film turns into. It's incredible, and I try to know all these things because one of my biggest intentions, not for the Hanged Man project, this is more me personally, but one of my biggest intentions in the near future is to find a form of art that is a form of media, really, that hasn't been, I can't say that hasn't been done before, because almost everything has been done before with multimedia, the visual arts and the audio and different aspects to that. But that's one thing that I have been taking into consideration a lot, is this whole genre of information that Kymatica and Esoteric Agenda is in. I definitely like the fact that it is factual and it has intellectual information in there, but to balance that, I really believe it needs that artistic side to it. And I believe that it's so unbalanced right now that I, at least with myself, I would like to see a lot more of an artistic push. And as soon as on the Hanged Man Project site, I basically released my intentions, a goal that I have for the Hanged Man Project being an art revolution, and right. what that is going to be is basically it could be anything in the art side. But I said, just to start, I'll have anyone anywhere in the world that wants to send in music, if it comes from the heart, if it comes from the soul, send it in, and I'm going to try and actually, make a compilation, and I will be using some of it for the film, and basically taking other people's artwork, other people's music, and integrating it into a multimedia documentary or something along those lines, to show that there's this huge demand for art, because art is the last of a dying breed of self-expression. There's not much of it anymore. Art is actually a form of shamanism. Art's a form of magic, in a way. And I think that's something that is very misunderstood nowadays because of the entertainment industry. It's art turned into an industry that basically began generating revenue, and that brought in the whole other aspect of the human psyche, which is that survival mode. And once people began linking survival mode and how comfortable they are in their comfort zone with something like art and free expression, then it began limiting art extremely. And right. I really wish that people would take a minute and really let that soak in, because, again, like I was saying before, music and movies and the arts is really what defines certain eras, because that is the only free expression that we really have nowadays. So it defines the decades as you go on. And right. if that's lost, in many ways, there's nothing left of that free expression. And it's really like the greatest fears. You see all these movies that are about epidemics and pandemics, like I Am Legend and the movie Outbreak and
zombie this, exactly. Zombie that.
Exactly. What that to me very much so represents is why those movies are so popular. Look at the subconscious appeal to something like that. And I'm not saying appeal as in a good thing, but a kind of the reason why we watch those is because it really strikes a deep chord in us, realizing that we're becoming an emotionless, very strictly intellectual society all around the world. The arts are being taken out of every educational system, and the arts that remain in any educational system are typically more formulaic and mathematic than anything. If you look at it, they're not telling you, okay, express yourself freely. What they say is, here's a vase and here is a certain type of like abstract artwork that we want you to recreate. Basically, do it by the numbers, color within the lines, and you'll get an A. Well, that is not free expression. That's math. That's formulaic. Yeah. And I think that's not just because, the Rockefellers have something to do with the General Education Board. It's not because of any individual. It's not because of any group. It's because
it's part of it.
It's definitely part of it. But none of that would exist if it weren't for our compliance. Absolutely none of it. So the thing is they are more symbols of what we desire nowadays as a society rather than the cause of those problems.
Yeah, I think the music industry, the TV, if future generations look back on our generation, and they look back at our generation's music, TV, and movies, what they're going to see is lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of those things have had all of the energy sucked out of them, and is just being played for the lowest common denominator. If you're sitting on the couch with a beer on your stomach, watching a football game, you don't have to think. If you're watching some of the videos that are on the I don't have TV. I haven't had TV for 18 years.
Yeah.
But if you're watching any of that stuff, it's lowest common denominator. There's nothing really highly stimulating. And when you do find something that's highly stimulating, it's like fine dining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Come across that stuff, it's like, oh my God, that's so good, and it's because it's outside of the program stuff that's just regurgitated out there in movies. Movies now are basically made for 15-year-olds.
Yeah,
that's it. That's what you're looking at. Don't try to be intellectual about it, because you're not going to get any of that. The odd one comes out, and when it does, it's like fine dining. It's like, wow, that was so good.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm actually glad that you even brought it up. The one way to look at it is the general. I guess again I would say like the general zeitgeist of our era. In future generations, if you were to look back on our generation now, what is it going to look like? Because if you think about it, all we have to look back in our own history, whether it be the last 100 years, the past several thousand years, the past 10,000 years of history, if you're looking back in those generations, the only thing we have to go off of is of understanding the evolution of human consciousness are those core pillars, I guess, of their society, which have to do with art, because the four pillars of society are art, religion, science, and philosophy. You'll find them in absolutely every single culture everywhere around the world for as long as we at least have written record.